2 students, 1 high school, an entire building echoing with the footsteps of Kayla Derns and Wesley Pike, the graduating class of 2024. Imagine walking through hallways designed for hundreds, sitting in classrooms built for 30, eating lunch in a cafeteria where your voice bounces off empty tables. This wasn't a movie scene or a thought experiment. This was Glenfield High School's final year, where teachers outnumbered students, where tradition fought against impossible odds, and where an entire community refused to let their school die without one last moment of pride. Have you ever been part of something everyone said was already over? Drop a comment if you've ever been part of a small, tight-knit community that refused to quit. Glenfield wasn't always a place defined by absence. 20 years ago, Friday nights meant packed bleachers at the football stadium, the marching band's drumline shaking the ground, and Main Street restaurants staying open late for post-game crowds. The high school held 400 students across 4 grades. Hallways buzzed with locker slams and gossip and laughter. Teachers knew most students by name, but not all of them. There were too many faces to memorize in a single year. The town existed because of the factory on the east side, a manufacturing plant that produced agricultural equipment and employed over 200 people. Families built lives around steady paychecks and predictable futures. Kids graduated, worked at the factory, or married someone who did, and raised their own children in the same 3-bedroom houses their parents had bought decades earlier. Glenfield was stability personified, a place where change happened slowly and roots grew deep. Then 2015 arrived, and with it, the announcement nobody wanted to hear. The factory was closing, relocating operations overseas where labor costs less and profit margins stretched wider. 200 jobs vanished over 18 months. At first, people stayed, hoping something else would fill the void. But hope doesn't pay mortgages or feed children. Young families started leaving first, chasing employment to cities 2 hours away, then 3, then states away entirely. The decline showed up in graduation class sizes. The class of 2016 had 200 students. By 2018, that number dropped to 150. The class of 2020 graduated 80 seniors. In 2022, 40 students walked across the stage. The class of 2023 had 12 graduates, and even that felt miraculous. Storefronts went dark one by one. The diner closed when its owner retired and nobody wanted to buy it. The hardware store liquidated its inventory. The movie theater, already struggling against streaming services, shut down permanently. Houses sat on the market for months, then years, their lawns growing wild and their for sale signs fading in the sun. The roads carried less traffic. The sounds of childhood, bikes on sidewalks, basketballs bouncing, kids calling each other across yards, faded into memory. The school board met quarterly to debate consolidation. Larger districts offered to absorb Glenfield's remaining students, promising better resources and more opportunities. It made financial sense. It made practical sense. But the board kept voting to stay open, bound by a promise made decades earlier. Until the last enrolled student graduates, the doors stay open. Education wasn't a business transaction to be optimized. It was a sacred trust between generations. By the fall of 2023, the impossible had arrived, an entire high school built for 2 students. Kayla Derns was senior class president, though the title felt absurd when your entire constituency consisted of one other person. She'd held leadership positions since freshman year, yearbook editor, debate team captain, student council representative, collecting responsibilities as classmates disappeared around her. Someone had to keep traditions alive, and Kayla appointed herself that someone. Her family stayed because her grandmother refused to leave the farm she'd worked for 60 years. Kayla's parents commuted an hour each way for work, exhausted every evening, but they honored the old woman's stubbornness. Kayla inherited that same stubborn streak. When friends transferred to larger schools with actual sports teams and drama clubs and AP classes, she stayed. This was her school. Her parents graduated from Glenfield. Her grandmother graduated from Glenfield. She would too, but the weight pressed down on her shoulders daily. She was the last editor of a school newspaper nobody read anymore, the last captain of a debate team that didn't exist. the final name on trophy cases that would be dismantled and sold. She carried the ghosts of every student who'd walked these halls before her, and some days that burden felt crushing. Other days, it felt like honor. Her philosophy became simple. If we're the last, we're going to do it right. No cutting corners. No treating senior year like a formality. She would graduate with dignity, or not at all. Wesley Pike was quieter, more comfortable with machinery than textbooks. His father ran the town's last auto repair shop, one of the few businesses still hanging on, because cars break down regardless of economic decline. Wesley spent afternoons in the garage, learning to diagnose engine trouble by sound alone, his hands perpetually stained with grease that never quite washed clean. He never imagined being part of a two-person graduating class. The thought seemed like science fiction, impossible enough to ignore. But as junior year ended and enrollment numbers for senior year came back, 2 students, just 2, he faced a choice. Transfer to the consolidated district 20 miles away, join a senior class of 300 strangers, or stay at Glenfield with Kayla and finish what they'd started. Wesley stayed, not because he loved school or dreamed of being valedictorian. He stayed because loyalty ran deeper than convenience in his family. This was his school, his town, his community. Someone had to be last. Might as well be him and Kayla. Their dynamic had formed over years of being the last kid standing. They'd known each other since elementary school, gone through that awkward middle school phase together, and now faced the bizarre reality of being an entire senior class. They were friends, but not best friends, comfortable with each other, but not inseparable. Different personalities united by shared circumstance. Group project became strange negotiations between 2 people who already knew each other's work styles. PE class turned into the teacher playing basketball with them, 3 people passing the ball back and forth. Chemistry labs designed for lab partners of 4 had been condensed down to Kayla and Wesley sharing beakers and Bunsen burners. The yearbook committee consisted of Wesley taking photos and Kayla writing captions, both of them laughing at the absurdity while taking it seriously anyway. They carried the weight of everyone who came before them, and they carried it together. Have you ever had to carry on a tradition when you were the only one left? Tell us about it in the comments. The teachers of Glenfield High could have left years ago. Mr. Hendricks, the history teacher, received offers from larger districts with better pay and actual class sizes. Ms. Chun could have retired at 62 and enjoyed her pension. Principal Garrett fielded recruitment calls from schools desperate for experienced administrators. But they stayed, bound by the same promise that kept the doors open, until the last student graduates. Mr. Hendricks taught history in the morning and coached basketball in the afternoon, though coaching felt generous when your entire team consisted of Wesley shooting free throws alone. After school, he mopped floors and locked doors, taking on janitorial duties because the district couldn't justify paying a full-time custodian for 2 students. He never complained. These kids deserved a real education, real experiences, and he delivered both regardless of how small the audience. Ms. Chun taught English and mathematics, switching subject between periods, her lesson plans tailored to 2 students who learned at different paces. She'd been teaching for 40 years and planned to retire after the class of 2023 graduated. Then enrollment numbers came in showing 2 seniors for 2024, and she signed on for 1 more year. She couldn't let Kayla and Wesley finish without her. They'd been her students since freshman year. She'd see them across that stage if it was the last thing she did. Principal Garrett ran morning announcements over the intercom, his voice echoing through empty hallways to reach an audience of 2. Sometimes he'd catch himself halfway through the announcements and laugh at the absurdity. He could just tell them in person. But tradition mattered, and traditions required ceremony, so he kept reading announcements into the microphone every morning at 8:15. The school day bent around Kayla and Wesley's needs in ways impossible at larger schools. Snow day? They'd reschedule and make up the work later. Doctor's appointment? Classes would wait. Someone sick? School paused until they recovered. The rigid structure that governed typical high schools melted into something more flexible, more human, more like family than institution. Lunch became family dinner. Teachers ate with students at the same table, real conversations replacing the usual cafeteria chaos. They talked about books and politics and family and the future. Ms. Shin shared stories about teaching in the 70s when the school was brand new. Mr. Hendricks discussed historical events like they were gossip, making the past feel immediate and alive. These weren't just teacher-student relationships anymore. They were something deeper, something that only happens when numbers shrink and walls come down. But maintaining traditions with two students required creativity and community investment. Homecoming still happened, though the court consisted of Kayla and Wesley voting for each other. Senior photos were taken in empty hallways that once held their parents and grandparents, the photographer positioning them carefully to suggest a larger student body that no longer existed. The yearbook filled with faculty pictures and retrospective pages showing Glenfield's history, a memorial disguised as an annual. Every morning, someone raised a flag and played the national anthem over the intercom. Every afternoon, someone lowered it again. The ritual continued not because it was required, but because it connected them to everyone who performed the same ritual before them. The town invested in ways both large and small. Retired teachers volunteered for guest lectures, driving in from wherever they retired to teach a single class on literature or science or art. Local businesses donated supplies, paper, pencils, textbooks the district could no longer afford. Town meetings debated whether to push for one more year, one more class, one more chance to keep Glenfield High alive. The collective answer was always yes. These kids would graduate from Glenfield High, period. It wasn't about Kayla and Wesley alone, though they were loved. It was about what they represented. Every graduation that ever happened there, every student who walked those halls, played on those fields, learned in those classrooms. The refusal to let a place's ending be undignified or forgotten. Community pride over bureaucratic efficiency. Love over logic. But traditions need celebrations. And in Glenfield, that meant one last prom. Most schools would have canceled prom with only 2 students. The expense couldn't be justified. The logistics didn't make sense. But Kayla insisted. They were seniors. They deserve a prom, awkward or not. Wesley hesitated at first. The idea of a 2-person dance felt ridiculous, like performing a play to an empty theater. But Kayla's determination wore him down, and eventually he agreed. If they were doing this, they might as well do it right. The teachers approved immediately. Mrs. Patterson, who'd taught music at Glenfield before retiring a decade earlier, volunteered to play piano. The diner owner, despite her business being closed, offered to bake pies instead of hiring caterers. Former students cleaned out attics and donated decorations, streamers, lights, table centerpieces from proms past. Someone's uncle agreed to DJ from his laptop, playing a mix of current hits and classics from Glenfield proms of years gone by. Parents transformed the gymnasium over a weekend. They hung streamers from rafters, strung lights across walls, arranged borrowed tables with white tablecloths and centerpieces made from wildflowers picked that morning. The space that usually smelled like sweat and floor wax suddenly looked elegant, or as elegant as a small-town gym could manage. It wasn't professional, but it was genuine, built by hands that cared. Prom night arrived on a Saturday in April. Kayla wore a dress her mother had worn to her own Glenfield prom in 1998, altered to fit, but keeping the original style. Wesley borrowed his grandfather's suit, slightly too big in the shoulders, but filled with history and good intentions. They arrived separately, each driven by parents who took too many photos and cried when they thought nobody was watching. 20 people showed up, teachers and their spouses, parents, a handful of townspeople who wanted to witness the last Glenfield prom. The basketball coach brought his elderly mother, who'd attended Glenfield proms in the 1950s, and wanted to see one more before she died. It wasn't the crowd of hundreds that used to fill this gym, but it was enough. More than enough. Mrs. Patterson played piano beautifully, her fingers remembering songs from 50 years of proms. The uncle DJ played requests, and soon everyone was dancing. Not just Kayla and Wesley, but teachers and parents and townspeople, young and old, swaying to music that connected generations. The basketball coach danced with his mother, both of them smiling through tears. Principal Garrett danced with Ms. Chun, laughing at some private joke. The photo booth, operated by Mr. Hendricks with a borrowed camera and props from the drama department storage, captured moments of pure joy. Goofy faces and sincere smiles, and the kind of laughter that comes from people who know they're witnessing something that matters. The coronation happened near the end of the night. Kayla and Wesley were crowned prom queen and king by default, but nobody laughed at the formality. Principal Garrett placed plastic crowns on their heads with genuine reverence, and the room erupted in applause. They slow danced to a song Mrs. Patterson chose, surrounded by people who love him for choosing to stay, for honoring tradition, for giving Glenfield one last beautiful memory. It wasn't sad. It wasn't pitiful. It was joyful, a celebration not just of Kayla and Wesley, but of everyone who'd ever attended a Glenfield prom. The gym held ghosts 100 dances, and this final one honored them all. Proof that ceremony matters, especially when the world says it's foolish. What's the most meaningful community celebration you've been part of? Share it below. These stories matter. Graduation morning arrived with unexpected surprise. Cars began filling the parking lot at 9 in the morning, an hour before the ceremony was scheduled to start. Kayla and Wesley, getting ready at home, had no idea what was building at the school. They expected the usual crowd, teachers, parents, maybe a dozen townspeople. They prepared themselves for an intimate, quiet ceremony. They had no idea half the county was coming. Former students drove hours to attend. People who graduated in the 80s and 90s, who'd moved away for work but never forgot where they came from. Teachers who retired years ago returned, wanted to witness Glenfield High's final graduation. Families who'd left town made pilgrimages back, their children asking questions about the empty buildings, and their parents explaining what used to stand where. The town's population seemed to triple in a single morning. Folding chairs were set up on the football field, the same field where generations had played under Friday night lights. The morning sun cast long shadows across yard lines that hadn't seen a game in years. Ms. Chun brought her violin. Mr. Hendricks borrowed the guitar from his nephew. Together they provided processional music, simple but heartfelt, as two graduates in caps and gowns walked through a crowd that rose to its feet. Kayla walked first, her eyes widening as she saw the crowd. Hundreds of people standing, applauding, crying. Wesley followed behind her, equally stunned, his grandfather's too big suit suddenly feeling exactly right. They walked slowly, taking in faces. Former teachers, old classmates, neighbors they'd known their entire lives, and strangers who come simply because they heard about the last graduation and wanted to bear witness. Principal Garrett stood at the podium, papers in hand, voice already cracking before he started speaking. He'd presided over 32 graduations in his career as principal. Some had 500 people in attendance. Some had elaborate speeches from valedictorians headed to Ivy League schools. But none had moved him like this one. He spoke about perseverance and commitment, about the promise Glenfield had made decades ago to never close until every enrolled student graduated. He talked about Kayla and Wesley not just earning diplomas, but carrying the weight of every student who'd ever walked these halls, every teacher who'd ever taught here, every family that called Glenfield home. His voice broke multiple times. "This is the smallest graduating class I've ever seen," he said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "And the proudest. These two students could have transferred. They could have chosen easier paths. But they stayed. They honored tradition. They gave the school the ending it deserved." When Kayla's name was called, the crowd erupted. Standing ovation, tears streaming down faces young and old. She walked across the stage, shook hands with each board member, and accepted her diploma with trembling hands. The weight of the moment crashed into her all at once. This was it, the final chapter, the last name called at a Glenfield High graduation. She was the last. Wesley's name followed. The same reaction, the same tears, grown men crying openly without shame. He accepted his diploma, turned to face the crowd, and finally understood what they'd been carrying all year. They weren't alone. They'd never been alone. Every person in this crowd had shown up because community isn't measured in numbers. It's measured in moments like this. The tassels turned simultaneously. Cameras flashed. People cheered and cried and held each other. Kayla and Wesley stood together, diplomas in hand, looking at hundreds of faces that had come to say, "You mattered. This mattered. We showed up. Principal Garrett returned to the microphone for his final words. Glenfield High School closes its doors today, but it doesn't end. It lives in every person here, in every lesson learned, in every moment of stubborn, beautiful perseverance. This school gave us something worth fighting for. Thank you for fighting with us until the very end. That summer, the district officially consolidated, but the story didn't end there. The school building was sold and converted into a community center, preserving the structure while transforming its purpose. The gymnasium, where 20 people dance at prom, now hosts town meetings and wedding receptions. The cafeteria, where lunch felt like family dinner, serves meals to seniors every Tuesday. The hallways still echo, but now with different voices, different purposes, different stories. Kayla went to State College, studying education. She plans to teach in small rural schools, places like Glenfield where teachers do more than educate. They preserve communities. Wesley stayed in town, working alongside his father to repair shop, eventually taking over the business when his dad's arthritis made wrenching impossible. He married a girl from the next county over, and they're raising 2 kids in the house where Wesley grew up. They became local legends without trying. Journalists still call occasionally, wanting to write retrospectives about the 2-person graduating class. Documentary filmmakers have reached out, but Kayla and Wesley mostly just live their lives, carrying the experience quietly, the way you carry any profound moment that shaped who you became. What they represented mattered more than what they accomplished. They proved that dignity doesn't require crowds. They validated that commitment matters more than convenience. They showed that endings don't have to be shameful or forgotten. They can be honored, celebrated, remembered with love instead of pity. All over America, small schools are closing and small towns are shrinking. The easy narrative frames this as decline, death, places being forgotten and left behind. But the real story is more complex and more beautiful. It's about communities finding ways to honor what mattered, even when circumstances force change. It's about people showing up when it would be easier not to, when logic says there's no point. When the world has moved on, community isn't about size. It's about showing up. Those 20 people at prom, those hundreds at graduation. They showed up, the teachers who stayed when they could have left, the parents who decorated a gym for 2 students, the former residents who drove hours to witness a final ceremony. They all showed up, not for recognition or reward, but because some things are worth honoring. That's what community means. Being present when it matters most. Choosing to witness endings with respect instead of letting them fade into nothing. Saying with your presence, you mattered, this mattered. I won't let it disappear without acknowledgement. Years later, Kayla and Wesley still meet for coffee occasionally, flipping through photos from that final year. Empty hallways. 2-person prom. Graduation day crowd. They don't feel sad about being the last. They feel honored. They got to close the book with dignity, surrounded by a community that showed them the most important lesson they'd ever learn. You're never really alone when people choose to show up. Who showed up for you when it mattered most? Share your story in the comments. Let's celebrate the communities that refuse to give up. And if this moved you, subscribe. We're telling stories about the places and people who show up when the world isn't watching.